Man, if only the Kraken could play the Sabres 82 times a year. It'd get a little boring after a while, but they'd win a lot of games. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back to Kraken R&R, where the Seattle Kraken, for the second time in a pretty short span here, and the only two times they'll play the Sabres this season, defeat the Buffalo Sabres 6-4 at home, getting their second win in a row, the first time in a while that they've strung two wins together. And while it didn't get off to as good of a start as some of the last few games, they were still able to put up another 6 on Buffalo and come away with the 2 points. Now again, if we're being perfectly honest with ourselves, it still wasn't quite the full 60-minute effort that we'd like to see from the Kraken. The second period, especially the first half of it, left something to be desired, but unlike when the Kraken have been stringing losses together, they were able to respond to those dips in their own play and come back and make up for it back the other way, and like the game against the Kings, do it in relatively quick fashion. And actually, for that matter, we might as well get into the game with the same lineup for the Kraken as the last one. Not only was the first half of the second period not the best part of this game for the Kraken, but they don't start off the first particularly well either. They almost immediately give up what really should have been a goal. I mean, it would have only been one goal, but they give up two very good chances for Buffalo to score right out of the gate. But thankfully, Decord is able to bail them out there on a couple of different occasions within the first few seconds and get them through that first minute. But eventually, a few minutes later, it's just too many chances for the Sabres, and a shot from way up by the blue line ends up going off of, I think it's McCann's hand, somewhere off of McCann on its way to the net. That redirects the puck out to the other side, so as Decord goes from one side of a screen to the other to try and make a save, the puck off McCann goes the other way and into the net to give the Sabres the early 1-0 lead. So for a Kraken team that has, over the course of the season as a whole, not had a lot of success in the first period, in fact only the Sharks have been worse in the first period so far this season, but the Kraken had been playing better over the last 3 games to start out the first 20 minutes. This was a bit of a step backwards towards how they'd been playing coming into these last few games. However, with that being said, while it would have been nice if the Kraken hadn't needed the Sabres to open the scoring in order to wake up into this game and get things turned around, that's what they do immediately after the puck drops, with the Sabres having that 1-0 lead. It's the fourth line out on the ice to take that drop at center ice, and they get quickly into the offensive end. It's Hayden and Mitchell Stevens that are down along the boards behind the Sabres net, forechecking away like that fourth line has done fairly well most of the season, really regardless of who's been on it. Eventually, they're able to win that puck back up to Riker Evans at the blue line. He skates in a little bit towards kind of the high face-off circle before firing off a shot on net. But with the shot coming from well out and not a lot of traffic in front of the net for the Kraken, it's a fairly easy save for Levi to make, which he's able to do. But one thing he was having some trouble with, especially early on in the game, but really as it went along, was allowing a lot of rebounds and not always seemingly having the best control of where they're going. And that's just what happens here, as this save is made, but it rebounds out to the far side, where John Hayden had managed to get from behind the net up into at least the vicinity of the front of the net. The rebound goes straight to him on the far side, and he lifts it into that far side of the net. At that point, not much of a chance for Levi to get back to make that save. And the Kraken have evened things up with Hayden's first of the season and just his 4th or 5th game back up with the Kraken here this year. And with this goal coming less than 30 seconds after the Sabres had opened the scoring, it's another quick response goal for the Kraken, who had a couple of those against the Kings. And as a fan, it has to be said, it does feel pretty good to be on the other end of that the Kraken have done it before, but it usually seems like it's going the other way. And even more importantly than that, at least as far as this game is concerned anyway, the Kraken are able to make sure that that isn't just a one-and-done response shift from the fourth line. As the rest of the team starts to contribute as well, they are able to maintain momentum out of that goal and really just keep control of the pace of play throughout the rest of the first period, and eventually that ends up making the difference. As we cross the halfway point of the period, the Kraken are going to take the lead with their second straight goal, and it doesn't necessarily come from where you'd expect, unless you watch the game or you've seen the box score, in which case you know exactly where it came from. And if we're being honest, it's probably a little bit more expected than the fourth line, who just scored the first goal, and this line did play pretty well in the game before against the Kings. Anyway, the point is, it comes from a line that has been a little bit of a thorn in the side for the Kraken for most of the season, and certainly not a fan favorite as far as lines go, and two of the players in particular. It's the Stevenson line with Burakovsky, and Bjorkstrand's bounced around a little bit, just happens to be on the line at the moment, but it's this line that honestly was the best line on the ice for the Kraken in this game. Again, they played pretty well against the Kings, and we had to say credit where it's due. They have not been playing very well for most of the season, but they played well in that game, and this game, they just continued that trend in the right direction and certainly make it count here as they get into the offensive end, get set up, and throw a couple pucks at the net. It's once again started by Riker Evans, who throws a puck at the net. It gets blocked on the way, bounces out to Bjorkstrand up in the slot. He fires a shot off, which gets blocked as well before it reaches the net. That one then bounces out to Stevenson, who from the far side has all the net he needs to shoot at, fires it in, hits it just off the post and banks in. Really not a ton of chance for Levi, who's been watching this puck pinball its way across the ice. Stevenson picks up yet another goal and yet another point, as he has quietly been a leading scorer for the Kraken since the middle of December. Now, he has been on the ice for a lot of goals the other way as well, but at least he's now making up for it by making sure the puck gets in the other net, even if he's not still doing the best job of making sure it stays out of the Kraken one. Anyway, his 8th of the season makes it 2-1 Kraken as Evans picks up his 2nd assist of the period, and Bjorkstrand picks up the other. That would eventually, even with some more Kraken pressure throughout the rest of this back half of the first, and really not a ton coming back the other way after all of the chances they let up early in the first. So even after a slow start to the game, the Kraken managed to get to the first intermission with a lead, which has not happened nearly enough so far this season. And we head into a second period, which has also been a bit of a problem period for the Kraken so far this year, and it doesn't necessarily start out this way. The middle of the period is really more the problem, but I suppose even if it doesn't show up as much on the scoreboard until the middle of the period, the start of it still wasn't great for the Kraken either. It's a parade to the penalty boxes pretty much from puck drop here to start out the second. The Kraken get the first power play, which they don't really get anything on. They let a couple of shorthanded rushes against, nothing particularly dangerous or anything like that, but it's almost equally as dangerous as anything they got the other way with the man advantage, so not a great first power play of the game for the Kraken. Then the Sabres get a power play not long after that's killed off, and this one does look pretty dangerous. Decord has to come up with a handful of pretty nice saves for the Kraken to kill this one off, and then the final second of it is ended 1 second short as the Sabres send the Kraken to another power play, and this one does look quite a bit better, and eventually it ends up scoring. It's just a nice back and forth play between Beniers and Stevenson as Beniers gets a puck about midway through the power play up around the face-off circle on the side near the benches, and from there he throws a nifty little spinning no-look backhand pass around his back and down to the goal line where Stevenson is waiting as the bumper. He waits a little bit with the puck. He has some time and space to pick a spot to pass it to, and he doesn't have to wait all that long as Beniers goes from where he made that pass straight out into the high slot. He gets the pass from Stevenson and buries the one-time shot into the back of the net to give the Kraken the 3-1 lead and the power play goal. Which is great, but Beniers' 10th of the season is pretty much the only bright spot of the first 15 minutes of the second period is, well, the Kraken do score on this power play. They send the Sabres right back to another one as that parade, like I said, just continues to the boxes back and forth, and the Sabres answer in kind with a power play goal of their own. Like the Kraken one, it takes a little while to end up scoring, but it's a shot from way up again by the blue line that ends up getting tipped and redirected in front of Decord. This time, it actually is redirected by a Sabres player. It's Zucker in front of the net who gets the tip on it. I mean, that's not much a goaltender can do about it. He's just standing in front of the net because of the extra man advantage, and the Sabres bring it back to within 1. Then a few minutes later, they end up tying it off of a shot from Tage Thompson that, quite frankly, is... I mean, like, Tage Thompson has one of the best wrist shots in the NHL. He's got a pretty good one-timer as well. He's just very good at shooting the puck. And he places this absolutely perfectly, but it's still a shot with a couple of players between he and the net other than Decord. And it's from the high face-off circle, the high slot area. It's a save that we usually would see Decord make. Unfortunately, though, this time with it being perfectly placed to the far side of Decord and the elite shot that it comes with, it finds its way cleanly past him to tie the game that the Kraken seemed like they were completely in control of just a few minutes ago. Happily, though, it wouldn't take the Kraken a few minutes or even 1 minute to retake control of the game, or at least the lead anyway, as they get back into the offensive end, and within a minute of Buffalo tying the game at 5-on-5, so the parade to the penalty box at this point had ended. There would be one more power play for the Sabres in the third period that they wouldn't score on, but it's the right line out on the ice. They get the puck down into the offensive end, down again behind the net where McCann gets to it. McCann up to right at the low faceoff circle, and then right finds, once again out of nowhere, Jamie Alexiak, who scored in that game against Pittsburgh, flying down the middle of the ice. He fires off the one-time shot from right and finds the back of the net for his second goal in a pretty short span, especially by Alexiak goal-scoring standards, and gives the Kraken right back the 4-3 lead. Again, less than a minute with that quick response goal from when the Sabres had scored to tie the game. And even after the Big Rig picks up his fourth of the season, that same group of 5 skaters are right back into the offensive end off the faceoff and nearly score again. In fact, get arguably a better chance on net that is just this time answered by a good save from Levi. Eventually, we would get to the second intermission with the Kraken maintaining that 4-3 lead. Unfortunately for the Kraken, the third period has been their period pretty much all season long, and yeah, a lot of times because of how poorly at least large chunks of the first 40 minutes have gone for the Kraken in most of the games this season, they have been chasing the game by the time the third period starts and had to try and make comebacks happen far too often, and not entered the third period with a lead all that often. This time they do enter the third period with a lead, and they still play a pretty good third period. Though I suppose, like the first and second period, it does take them a little bit to get to their game. They allow the Sabres to get a couple chances a couple minutes into the third, and then allow the Sabres to have that power play that is their worst power play of the night. The first one they had looked pretty dangerous but didn't score. Then the second one looked a little less dangerous but did score. This one looked less dangerous still and didn't score, so the Kraken killed that off. And then start to turn things around, even it out, and start pushing back the other way to extend the lead, which eventually they're able to do is, once again, it's the right line out on the ice. Once again, it's McCann with the puck behind the net, and this time, he doesn't need Shane Wright to be the middleman, as he finds another defenseman and an unlikely scoring defenseman. Anyways, he passes it up to Adam Larson, who fires off the one-time shot. It does get a bit of the inside of the leg of Tage Thompson on the way, which might have helped the redirection through the 5-hole and into the net to give the Kraken the 2-goal 5-3 lead. And that makes it feel a little bit better getting through the last few minutes of the game. And then from there, it just kind of seems like they're happy to ice the rest of this game away with that multi-goal lead. They got the cushion in case one bad mistake or one bad bounce happens somewhere along the line. And as it turns out, they ended up needing that, is eventually the Sabres are able to get Levi pulled, get the extra skater out on the ice. And with just under a minute and 30 seconds left, I think it's 1:21 left after this goal goes in, there's some chaos around the net, kind of off to the side of the net, a bunch of players whacking away at the puck, and it pops out of that pile right out to Tuck, who then tucks it into the net to bring the Sabres back to within one with still 81 seconds left on the clock. Fortunately, for the third time in the night, the Kraken respond quickly. Again, the Sabres are able to get Levi pulled, get into the offensive end, get the extra skater out on the ice. But pretty much the second they do, McCann gets the puck along the boards in the Kraken end and fires it perfectly into the net about 150 feet away to give the Kraken back that 2-goal lead. 6-4 with the empty netter for McCann. His first goal, well, he's pretty much only been scoring on the empty net lately, but he's picked up his third point of the night with the empty net goal. Eventually, the Sabres would pull Levi again, and McCann didn't necessarily have... Oh, actually, McCann did put one wide, and then he got a pass up to Tanev, who kind of fell as he was trying to shoot it. So the Kraken don't hit the empty net again, but they do get to that 6-4 victory. So then as far as the game as a whole is concerned, am I completely convinced the Kraken would have been able to win playing this way against a good team? No, not really. I think they might have had a tough time against some of the league's best teams, like the last two that they played, playing this same style, especially the way that it kind of came out to slow starts in really all 3 periods. Now, the second period's a little different because it starts with basically 4 back-to-back power plays back and forth between each team, so that's kind of a weird way to start out a period. Either way, the Kraken didn't look great in special teams except for the back half of that second power play that they eventually scored on. The penalty kill didn't really look fantastic, especially in that first kill that they had. Weirdly enough, the best kill of the night, I thought, was the one that the Sabres ended up scoring on. The Kraken pretty much kept it, they kept it for the first minute or so of that power play almost entirely on the Sabres side of center ice. And then eventually, after the Sabres, with a man advantage, they're going to end up with possession. At some point, get possession, they get into the Kraken end, and then one tip later, even with everything the Kraken had actually done very well during that kill, it's the one of the 3 that ends up with the goal behind them. So again, special teams are a bit of an adventure for the Kraken, and they kind of have been their entire existence. Even the season they went to the playoffs at 100 points, their special teams were not the strength of that team, and the starts of periods were an issue this entire game. They start out the first poorly, and that leads to a goal. The second, even with all the special teams, it doesn't go particularly well. And then the start of the third, fortunately, they don't give up a goal, but they do give up some chances, and some spend another 2 minutes on the kills. So yeah, against a good team, especially a good power play like some of the teams the Kraken faced towards the end of that road trip, might not have gone as well for them, but fortunately they played better than their opponent and got 2 more points in the standings, as they've won now 2 in a row to start out this homestand. And then as far as how some more specific players did on a more individual level, especially those younger guys that we're watching to see how they develop over the course of this year and the core of the team going forward into future years. Kakko and Beniers, Schwartz as well, that line, they're still fine. They had some good moments over the course of the game, but it was probably their worst game in a while. I would say, I think pretty easily their worst game in a while. They didn't necessarily do anything that poorly, no egregious mistakes or anything, but they didn't really produce nearly as much as they have been. And I mean, look, they've been producing so much for the Kraken so consistently, that's not necessarily a complaint. Just pointing out it wasn't necessarily a game that they had to be the ones carrying the team. That job, weirdly enough, happened to go to the Chandler Stevenson line. They were, I would say, hands down the best line for the Kraken in this game. Every bit almost of what the Beniers line has been as far as creating consistent offensive zone pressure almost every time they were out on the ice. And yeah, there were still some of the frustrating plays where Burakovsky turns over a puck weirdly in the offensive end and it ends up coming back the other way and leading to a chance. Fortunately, Decord is once again stealing the Kraken points in the standings, or at least keeping pucks out of the net a little bit more often than you'd necessarily expect an average goaltender to do. So the defensive end of the back checking part is still not fantastic from that line, unlike the Beniers line, but offensively, I mean, again, like I said, Stevenson has been one of the top scorers for the Kraken since the middle part of December, which includes everything that Kakko, Beniers, and Schwartz have done since that trade that brought Kakko to Seattle. That being said, I still understand, and believe me, I'm right there with you, that a couple of good games here in a row and some consistent point production from Stevenson still is not really enough to make up for an entire first half of the season of disappointment and frustration and pulling your hair out at what he's doing defensively, which isn't a lot, and even in these last 2 games, really defensively has not been particularly great. The goal with the empty net that goes in here at the end to bring the Sabres back to within 1 with a minute left, Stevenson standing right there with as much of a chance as Tuck to get that puck that squirted out of the group of players. He's just not quick enough on his feet or with his stick in the defensive end to do anything about it, and Tuck whacks it in while Stevenson's still standing there, not really realizing what's happened until, I mean, basically the Sabres are skating down, high-fiving each other in front of the bench. But again, he's scoring so much the other way that, at least for now, it's making up for it, and even maybe a little bit extra on top of that. Even still, though, if we're going to criticize the consistently bad parts of games of different players, we got to be able to still praise the consistently good parts of their game as well, and Stevenson now has been consistently producing offensively for the Kraken, and that's something that has been certainly an issue for this team over the course of the season. As far as a couple of the other younger players, specifically Wright and Evans, Evans has 2 assists, Wright has an assist of his own, so both of them have pretty good games as far as the score sheet is concerned, and both of them had some pretty good moments throughout this game. They both also had some moments that you will see from younger players, just kind of weird decisions or maybe a little bit of an extra careless pass in the defensive end. Just kind of things that probably would work at lower levels, but don't necessarily work at the higher levels. Still, it's way outweighed, I would say, by the things that they're doing well. And obviously, again, as the score sheet shows, they are producing offensively, doing some good things in the offensive end. And those defensive blunders here and there, those are things that they can clear up as they spend more time in the NHL. We're only halfway through the first season of Wright, and Evans is now, I mean, he came up around this time last year, so he's now kind of a full season in the NHL, and I mean, things are going pretty well. He's pretty solidly earned a spot as a second pairing defenseman alongside Montour. Yeah, I think that part of it will come around, and that'll get better and better as time goes along. The defensive part of the game, whether it's forward like Wright, certainly, but even a defenseman like Evans, it's the defensive part of the game that usually takes a little bit more time for a younger player to get the handle of at the NHL level. Now, that's not necessarily what we've seen with Beniers, for example, who just right away has been a great defensive forward, and it's the offensive part of the game that he's had to kind of refigure out as he and his line that he's been on, regardless of who's with him on the wings, have kind of been the focal point of other teams, since the Kraken have not necessarily had a true top line to distract from Beniers, so he ends up drawing a lot of those tougher matchups. regardless, Beniers is a little bit more of an outlier in that the defensive part of his game he figured out right away, and the offense has kind of come along here now with Kakko on his wing. But yeah, anyway, with Evans and Wright, I don't think it's anything to worry about that we still see fairly consistently a mistake or two per game that if they were more seasoned players like Chandler Stevenson or Andre Burakovsky, for example, it would be a little bit more frustrated with the consistency of those mistakes that they're making. But it's stuff it'll figure itself out. They're both smart players that, given a little bit more time and experience a couple years in, we'll see less and less of that as time goes on, especially I think if Riker Evans plays a lot more with a guy like Montour that communicates very well on the ice and can kind of help guide him to the right places in the defensive end on the back check, stuff like that. It's something that will certainly get better, and they're going to be a big part for Evans, the top four of the Kraken going forward in the defensive end, and for Wright, the top six at some point here on the offensive end. With that, let's close things out with the Kraken 3 stars, as always brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you do want to help decide Kraken 3 stars after, well, certainly games like this one, where I thought there was a lot of options, nothing that really stood out as particularly obvious. There's guys I will end up going with, but I think there are plenty of guys that you could make an argument for any number of them. I'm not going to necessarily stick to the 3 official ones, although they were all 3 Kraken. So if you want to help decide them after Kraken games, you can go to the link down below in the description and support on Patreon as well. With the first star, though, I'm going to go with a guy that isn't necessarily who you would have expected to be the first star and isn't the guy that showed up the most on the point sheet, but he is the one that got things going for the Kraken offensively, and honestly, he's a player that I kind of wish spent a little bit more time up with the Kraken. I understand why. He's talent-wise, and we're talking about John Hayden here if it wasn't already obvious. Talent-wise, it makes sense why he hasn't necessarily cracked the top 12 forwards of this franchise and hasn't consistently played a role up with the Kraken. But even still, I've always thought he's kind of the almost perfect, prototypical sort of fourth-line player on a good team where, I mean, yeah, usually at that point, you have a little bit more of your high-end talent and money tied up in your top 6, your top 9, and you need to have these league minimum kind of, take a term from baseball, 4A type of players that are up and down from the AHL, maybe not quite NHL talent, but they offer specific parts of the game that you can have, and you're probably not going to spend more than 10 minutes a night on the ice in most games, but when they are on the ice, they'll do their role really well, and for John Hayden, that is the physical part of the game that he's going to be the type of guy that you want to know where he is on the ice if you're an opposing player when he's out there, which quite frankly is the type of player the Kraken really could use a lot more of, especially the physical part of the game, than they've necessarily had on their roster at large chunks of the 3.5 years now of their existence. Plus, when you have a guy like that that's not playing a lot and really plays a lot more of the physical part of the game, and then he does end up scoring, especially as a quick response to a slow start to a game, that's the type of thing that can fire up a bench, and it sure seemed to do that in the first period of this game. Then with the second star, it might be a guy that'll get some groans from some of you watching this, though I won't be able to hear you through the screen that you're watching it on. I gotta go with Chandler Stevenson. I know he's a player that's kind of turned into a scapegoat, and, well, I mean, he's earned it. He has not had a good season. In fact, he's had a downright terrible season, especially given the contract that he signed to come here and play in Seattle with the Kraken. But even through all that, you got to give credit where it's due. He, and especially his line, had a fantastic game in this one. He ends up getting that goal to give the Kraken the lead in the first and has continued to produce well offensively. It's the second game in a row that his line has played well, and even in this game, they really didn't give much up the other way. Aside from Stevenson happening to be the guy that's standing next to Tuck when he pushes in that fourth goal for the Sabres. But as a line, over the course of the whole game, they were quite good. And then as far as the third star is concerned, again, there's any number of different guys you could put here, and I don't necessarily think that any of them would be a terrible decision. Beniers was mentioned a couple of times over on Patreon. McCann had a 3-point night. Both Tanev and Stevens played pretty well as other parts of that fourth line that might not have played a ton, but when they did, it seemed to make a difference. Shane Wright with the assist. But I feel like I kind of got to go with the defenseman, given that you have a 2-point night from Riker Evans, and then the goals from both Alexiak and Larson. And between the three of them, since he was the one mentioned more on Patreon, I'll go with Jamie Alexiak. He does get that goal from McCann and Wright that, well, sure, it's another one-time shot from an open spot on the ice, and that's a pretty high-danger shot to get off on net, so a good chance of scoring there. He does a pretty good job of coming from the far side and just finding a way to get open to be available for that shot in the first place. I think a lot of times we see a defenseman like a Larson or an Alexiak that are a little bit more the defensive minded part of whatever pair they're in, that tend to stay a little bit more up by the blue line and are less likely to dive down farther into the offensive end to become part of an offensive play, especially when it's on the far side of the ice like Alexiak does here. But he read what was going on, saw that they had good control with McCann having the puck behind the net, and got himself ready for a potential chance working its way out front, and that's just what happened to get that goal. But anyway, let me know what you think down in the comment section below. I'd love to know your thoughts, who your 3 stars would be. Again, any number of other players you could mention. Heck, if you had a completely different 3 stars, I don't necessarily think that would be invalid at all. I do kind of feel like Stevens has to be there, and Hayden I feel like will be a popular pick, but let me know what you think if you disagree down in the comments. Until next time, stay safe out there, be good to each other. God bless, and go Kraken.